The Rebel Capitalist Show. The motivation for the central bank or the government, whomever was in charge, let's say, of this new digital currency, would be to circumnavigate the banking system so they can have more control over the money supply.
Well, this is the bit that really scares me. So, the central bank or the government have to do something. The bank can't bail in. I don't think they can bail out. So they have to come up with a new solution of depositors not losing their money. But at least with the current banking system, your money is one step removed from the government. Imagine what happens when you have a government or the central bank issuing this currency in this way and having the payment relationship through this application. Imagine me and you doing a transaction. I'm in one country, my island thinks that I should be paying them some tax. You're in another country, your government thinks that you should be paying some tax in that transaction, and it's routed via Skype or Zoom. And therefore, depending on where those servers lie, they also think they should get some tax out of it. If that's connected to the central bank digital currency, you can imagine 3 different governments all trying to automate their tax collection. And then you finding yourself in a scenario where you're saying, well, I should have only paid one government in that transaction. It's automated out, but I'm going to, have to dispute these 3 different governments that have automated my tax collection. And then during that time, that's also already connected to the passport system. So your passport gets switched off while this is trying to be resolved.
Right.
And maybe you try and leave your house and you haven't actually got the vaccine that allows you to actually exit your house during this lockdown. And you can imagine all of these different systems conflating with your financial system in this app. In order to download the app, you have to actually opt into some kind of tracing and tracking. Just like we saw during 9/11, it was a reason to opt out of basic liberties, freedoms, human rights out of a disastrous situation. You can see the exact same thing happening here. And I think this is the catalyst that the government needs. And what's the drug to get people addicted to this app and this money? Well, it's helicopter money, it's universal basic income. It's download this app, will give you some free money. If your bank goes bust, download this app, you'll have all your money and protected, but you're going to have to opt in to all these things when you download the app. And that's a really, that's why I believe that the opt out, because fiat currency is great in terms, running your life on Bitcoin. I've been doing that for a long time. Is very complex. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not. You have to have a certain level of reserves in order to sustain the volatility. So it's not appropriate for certain things. Fiat currencies are great when if your rent is charged in dollars and you pay in dollars, then you can manage your life around that. You can't when you're trying to do it in a foreign currency or Bitcoin. That's a very complex thing. So fiat currencies are very good for your personal expenditure, for your day-to-day life, but it's just a disastrous place for your savings. And so this is where these competing currencies become really important.
Yeah, so this gets really Orwellian very quickly. A government-backed digital currency is so much more. There's so much more downside from a libertarian standpoint than just these little electronic dollars that we have now. Can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, so the current version of the digital dollar is created by the private banking sector every time they issue a loan. So at the moment, you have banks which are one step removed from governments or central banks. And therefore, when governments implement new laws around anti-money laundering, essentially they put together laws that all the banks have to follow. But there is also some, rights in terms of access to data. There is a due process in there at the moment. The plus side is that it adds a few layers of additional process in there. The downside is that because of the way that the money is actually created when it's backed by debt, you get this Ponzi scheme like property to fiat money. And so if that system is coming to the end of a debt cycle and it looks like it's reaching that stage where this system's no longer going to sustain the debt, then we move to another system, which is removing a lot of that. And then you're right, direct, where the intersection between politics and your financial affairs and privacy just get depleted away to the next stage. And we all know that when you implement these new laws in order to get out of disastrous situations like this health crisis, those don't get reversed back afterwards. This is a one-way ticket. The way that I see my money at a bank right now is I know that I'm going to have to give them all sorts of things just to prove that it didn't come from crime. I know that I'm going to have to go through in a massive amount of process just in order to access that money and send that money. And in my mind, I'm only willing to leave an amount at a bank that I know that one day just might not be my money.
Right.
And that's the way that I see it. And it's not. I'm not talking about the hard crimes here. I'm talking about things like deciding that you want to transact in the Bitcoin markets. And because Bitcoin is something that may not be politically in favor, therefore you end up, not being able to access your money. And, this is where we're moving. And this is particularly intrusive when, the month to month people don't feel this. But when you start to build wealth, it really becomes a very intrusive thing.
How can people opt out of this system? I mean, if they're looking at this saying this is complete madness, I don't like this at all. But you are also saying that Bitcoin can be relatively cumbersome. So is there a good ideal solution right now, or is that sometime in the future?
Bitcoin gives you the ability to own your own money. It's like a digital cash. It's yours. Whoever owns what's known as a private key owns the Bitcoin. You can spend it as you choose. Obviously, if you want to commit crime with that Bitcoin, that's a really bad idea because it creates a permanent ledger where if the government can attach an identity to that Bitcoin, then that's indisputable because it's verified by thousands of supercomputers around the world. But you can spend it as you choose. And as long as you're doing legitimate stuff with that, you're not going to have those issues. And the money supply is 100% fixed. And this is what really, really drove my interest in the market, that when you've got this fixed money supply of 21 million, that actually is a decreasing money supply because when people lose Bitcoin, that is a ruthless system. If you lose your Bitcoin, those disappear.
Yeah, you're done.
If you lose the private key, the money supply contracts. And so really we've created this digital scarce asset, the first, scarce asset that can be digitally sent. Now, couple that with the fact that the majority of the world think it's a Ponzi scheme, a scam, a currency just for drug dealers, or just a get rich quick scheme. The reason it's produced 9 million % returns over 10 years is because each year more people realize that it's not. The really interesting scenario that we have with Bitcoin now is that it started to reach commodity-like properties. It's not a store of value like gold. Gold is, if you want to preserve your wealth outside of the financial system, then gold is still king. But Bitcoin is a speculative store of value. And what that means is that Bitcoin could be a much better store of value than gold, but it doesn't have 5,000 years of history. It's only got 10 years of history. It's got properties that are much better than gold in terms of actually fulfilling that eventually. But there's a speculative element to it, which is that no one really knows whether that's going to happen or not. Personally, I think it's an inevitability, and I'm willing to make a big bet on that. And now it's getting more and more institutionalized with products like ETFs coming through and regulated funds coming through, and iconic investors and hedge funds like Paul Tudor Jones saying that they're going to put 1% of their hedge fund into Bitcoin. When Bitcoin becomes a store of value, it will only produce the returns that gold do, which is maintain your wealth. But in the meantime, it's still a speculative store of value, which, in my perspective, creates one of the highest return, risk-adjusted returns that you can have out there. Now, it's still very, very risky. This thing could all fail. But I don't think you'll find a better odds. And the fact that this speculative nature still exists means that you get to crucify the returns that you could get in gold, which it has every single year since it's been in existence. And even if you don't believe in that, then just take some of your Bitcoin returns and use it to buy gold. Because so far, it's been a great way of accumulating wealth. And personally, I believe that it can be a better store of value eventually. But there's massive rewards if it does. as a result of those that don't believe it yet. And each year, more and more people converting. Why? Because the utility of money that you can own increases every year. The utility of being able to spend your money increases every year. And the utility of a fixed supply digital asset, the world's scarcest asset we've ever seen, increases every year.